Well, welcome to the Lili channel. That's laughter, like with tree removal, inspiration, like the people in front of me, learning from all three of us, and innovation. Well, YouTube is innovative and everything we do is somehow innovative. I have brought these two together because it's Financial Literacy Month for a couple more days. My channel is about bringing resources, about having more fun with everyday life, swapping ideas, being real, having fun. So we're going to be covering 5 questions. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5. We've got Caroline Collins Rank here, as well as John Mackey. Woo! Yay! I'm so grateful for the two of you. Now, why did I call these two on here? Well, because in addition to my background, and I'll talk about that later, I wanted to find someone who was super passionate about the whole money picture without necessarily being involved in it from an income point of view, and who lives everyday life the way she believes that people ought to. So walking her talk, and that would be Caroline. Super passionate about it. I'm going, just a total inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
Plus, we're close friends from Meetup, which always helps. Meetup is a great venue for meeting people that you might otherwise not have connected with. And then John Mackey is a relatively new friend of mine for ours from Power Talk seminars. And because of his previous experiences, not only with being bugged by debt collectors, if I'm right, as well as working with them, having an inside view, and letting you know how the hell to handle it. Plus being I don't know if you're newly published or it's a dang good title. I can't wait to see the book.
No, the book was published a few years ago.
Okay.
And it's due for an update right now because there was a new regulation that came out called Regulation F, and which allowed the debt collectors to come after you using social media. And before they couldn't, now they can. They can now call you multiple times a day, but only a certain amount of times per week. So some of it's changed.
Okay.
So
once again, we've got the one who's passionate about the subject and isn't in the industry in the sense of formally, but is taking in the information constantly, improving her life because of it and her family's bottom line, as well as our credit specialist and myself. I have been part of the welfare program. Technically, well, WIC program is not officially a welfare program, but is considered as such. And I was there for 15 years in customer service. I am with another membership-oriented program now with the marketing side of it. So I see different angles of the whole money picture. So you imagine Costco and you imagine a WIC program, totally different worlds. And on top of that, life coach. So it's a medley, but today I get to hear Caroline's viewpoint and John's, both from the home ec side view as well as consumer, parent, etc. First question out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
okay.
Please subscribe, like, share, click, etc. You know the drill. But we have, who or what are you most grateful to or for being better with the money thing, whether it's earning, spending, etc. Who would like to answer?
I'll start.
Okay. John, then.
I learned the most, believe it or not, as a child, watching my dad and being angry at him for not spending money. He was a blue-collar worker in the aviation industry. He raised his family on one income, and his total goal, along with my mom, was for my mother to stay at home and being able to provide us a solid home structure. Not to say that other people do it differently and can't have that solid home structure, but that was his goal, and that was his goal back then. He was a World War II vet. He was also a man that grew up during the Depression. And during the Depression, he learned his lesson that every penny counts. And he would, when I'm talking pennies now, everything was put into a ledger. Everything had a receipt. Everything was structured with him and no money left without his approval. Now, in this day and age, that would not work. Many of his stuff does, but that particular part of it wouldn't. He would have been a proud member of Dave Ramsey because he had one credit trade line on his credit report for his entire life.
Wow.
And that was his home loan. He got that paid off within the first 7 years of ownership of that house. Now, with that said, I'm going to go off a long diatribe. I may take the entire hour and a half or whatever time we do we have, but we can't live like that way anymore. He saved his money. He put it into savings. But we've got so many different avenues now to put our money into: 401ks, matching funds from employers. But the problem is that the development of the credit score created the need, and the advertising that is put out there about what is your credit score, it creates this desire that we transformed from a savings society into a spending society. Nobody saves anymore. By nobody, I'm being very general. But we know that the majority of people don't have enough money to save. We know that income is less and how much difficulty people have when you're trying to live on minimal income. Somebody gets sick, they lose an income. Household incomes are based on dual incomes. So I know I'm going off here, but that's the person that I respected the most in the credit education area.
Huh. And you, Caroline?
My parents, who I'll say were very well educated, had a lot of education, read a ton of newspapers, just really looked for knowledge. But they didn't have a lot of knowledge when I was growing up about personal finance. So, I got the save your money. If you want to buy something, save for it. Don't go into debt to buy it. All good information, right? But I didn't get a whole lot of information about investing. My mom took my brother and me to a stock. I think she owned stock in AT&T, and she took us to a stockholders meeting once. And of course, we were like completely overwhelmed. Didn't know anything about it. Didn't know what it was. But kind of heard some rumblings about owning stock. But I really didn't know very much about it. And I discovered through the Ormond show on CNBC way back in the 90s, I think it was, and really watched that every weekend, read her books, started looking for books by other people. David Bach, I read some of his books. And then just recently, in the last few years, I have wanted to expand. So I started listening to Dave Ramsey because I wanted to hear, he's such a huge presence in the space, this space that I'm so interested in. I wanted to hear what he had to say. So I could learn a little bit and hear his alternative viewpoints on some things. And just also know what other people are talking about when they mention things about him. And discovered along the way the FIRE movement, which is financial independence, retire early.
Oh,
and Mr. Money Mustache, who's like kind of the biggest player in that space, and Paul Pant and the Choose FI guys, and JL Collins, and just really expanding my horizons and trying to hear about all these different viewpoints and all these different approaches to personal finance. So I'm a late bloomer, came to this late, unfortunately, but we've really kind of, my husband and I in the last 10 years have really kind of doubled down and tried to figure out what we needed to do to catch up and get ourselves in a good place. And I'm fascinated by all of it. I listen to hours and hours a day. I read blogs, I listen to podcasts, I read books. I find it completely enthralling, but I realize I'm kind of not the norm. Most people don't find it all that interesting. And so I would love to be able to help other people kind of distill down what I've learned and help people that aren't that interested in it just kind of get a snapshot of what they need to know so they can not be overwhelmed and move on with what they need to know, because it can be overwhelming. It really can. And luckily, my parents know a lot now, and I can sit down and have conversations with them now about the things that they've learned. But back when I was growing up, it just wasn't that much. There weren't that many options. Roth IRAs hadn't come into the fore yet. There were still a lot of pensions, so people weren't having to take care of their own retirement. So it's just been a real journey from not knowing much to now being really consumed by it and trying to learn everything I can and wanting to help other people learn that as well without totally overwhelming them and making them just shut down and go into a fetal position like, I don't want to know anymore. But yeah, so that's kind of where I am. My parents are very well-intentioned, save, which is a good thing, live within your means, which is a good thing, but that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. And I kind of don't think that's enough to know anymore. And John's right, with all the credit, people it's almost impossible to get through life now without dealing with credit. And so knowing about that is so important, and knowing how to manage it within your means and not get yourself in trouble where you have to dig out from it. Because if you have debt, you can't build wealth very well.
No, it's so true. It's so interesting to hear both of your backgrounds, because I'm first generation American. My parents got here from Hungary in 1965, and the only reason they were able to get a home or a house after being in an apartment for 3 years, I think, was that they were both physicians, and the person they, I guess, talked with about the home had faith in them. They barely had a checking account. And then I remember my mom teaching me probably at age 15 that I really needed to get a credit card to have some sort of credit history. And I was like, yeah, what? Okay, fine. She said, and then you pay it off every month. I'm like, okay. I think I maybe used it once or twice. And my dad had taught me to set up a savings account. And I think I was the only kid in the family who did that. I remember calling to inquire what the balance of my savings account is. I swear I sounded just like him when I said it. I'm thinking, you don't have to sound like him, just say what he says. And I think I had $70 in my account one time. I thought, wow. So I was proud. And it wasn't really discussed in terms of technicalities. It was more like, okay, we are not going to have a cabin like everybody else does. We're going to Hungary in 2 years to see grandma. Or we don't get fancy clothing because we want to go to a concert instead. So they taught values in that sense. I remember my dad being laid off when I was 13, and we almost moved to Boston because my mom's part-time clinic income wasn't going to cover the whole family, and we were in a state of panic. That's the one time I really felt like something was different. Otherwise, we weren't shoppers at all. In fact, it's almost like sickness in our family. Maybe my brother likes shopping more than the rest of us, but that's not saying much. We really are like, don't bring me in there. Not even online. It's really funny. That has been maybe our saving grace, no matter how expensive life gets, is we can't stay out shopping. But I have had to educate myself in other ways, because while it is important to save and to not shop in certain places, as far as budgeting, didn't really even think about it. I guess my one claim to fame is Financial Fitness book, and there are many, many books out there, as you've heard Caroline say. That one really resonated with me because of its basic language, written by entrepreneurs who went through hell and fixed things for themselves. I think I mentioned earlier that just because of where I've worked, I've seen different points of view, but I'd say my gratitude goes to my parents for teaching me about the saving, about the giving back, actually. It was like at each maybe birthday or holiday, we'd go through the closets and see which toys we'd give away. And just as far as really not spending when you don't need to have the item, because they grew up with sort of, I wouldn't say communist mentality, it was more like they're from a communist country, so everything was scarce to begin with, and they weren't dying to buy everything. Actually, that made them somewhat unique, because they had friends who who survived the Holocaust who didn't care to save at all because who knows what's going to happen with your life anyway. It was just interesting points of view. I'm being really verbal here. So we'll take a 10-second break and then come the
Well,
mistake.
it's interesting because we could keep on going on this one particular area. The major point that I want to make with this, amount of misinformation we have out there, and where do people get the truth? That is so important. The other thing is, as far as my lifetime, it's only been recently that we're a media-driven generation. At the younger people, it's media-driven, and everything you watch, people want. The media, the advertising, tries to get you to buy things all the time, and it's a constant repetition on that. And until we get away or understand how we're being manipulated, now I'm sounding like I don't know, some conspiracy theorist, but the reality is that we are being manipulated through advertising on what to buy, how much to spend. 30% interest isn't that much, things along that line. Well, we've got to open our eyes.
You know what, you just made me realize another thing I was grateful to for my parents is the fact that I had a TV watching limit of 30 minutes a day. And the other thing was we did Lent, which really taught us discipline. We didn't follow everything that Catholics do, but that was one thing we really did. And that I almost wish it stuck more, but in many senses it has. So those were the gratitude minutes. Now we get to go on to